Arizona is home to more venomous snakes than any other state here in the US. So today, we'll be covering every single one of them. With well over 50 native snakes found living in the lowland deserts, plateaus, and Sky Island mountains, Arizona is an absolute snake hotspot. Literally, its deserts get to like 125 degrees. And some American species can only be found within its borders. The first of which, the tiger rattlesnake, is often cited to be drop for drop the most toxic rattlesnake species in the world. And it's even a contender for the most toxic snake in North America sometimes. Now, I know a lot of you are thinking of another rattlesnake species that you oftentimes hear is the most venomous. But we'll get to that one eventually, trust me. Despite being super toxic, they don't actually have a lot of venom, and there's never been a death from a tiger rattlesnake bite. These guys also live in pretty harsh terrain, usually canyons and mountain foothills. They only live in this tiny region between South Arizona and northern Mexico. Although it does seem like they get really close to New Mexico in the southeastern corner of the state. So maybe somebody out there actually has seen a New Mexico tiger rattlesnake, I'm not sure. My favorite thing about tiger rattlesnakes is their comically small head. Like, it is super tiny when compared to the rest of their body. And of course, like their name suggests, they have these bands or stripes all across the body. Now, I have actually found more tiger rattlesnakes than any other rattlesnake species in the state of Arizona. And to me, they are a staple of the canyons. And they're very different from the snakes that I'm used to in my home state of Louisiana. Now, another rattlesnake that looks eerily similar to the tiger sometimes can be found all throughout central and western Arizona, and that's the Southwestern speckled rattlesnake. This is the most variable rattlesnake species in the US, and the reddish-brown variant looks almost like a mottled tiger rattlesnake. But these guys come in blues, oranges, and even whites, which are some of the most incredible-looking snakes in the country. And their different colors and variants are locality-specific, meaning they specifically match the habitat and the rocks that they live on. While they have been known to use mammal and tortoise burrows from time to time, they mostly rely on those rock crevices. And because of this, populations can be very isolated. This is why you can find blue speckled rattlesnakes, and just a few miles away you'll start getting those reddish brown ones. And sometimes there will be kind of an intergrade zone, it just really depends on where they live. For identification, they don't have that super tiny head that tigers have, and they have all of that speckled, sort of mottled patterning that's usually pretty distinct regardless of their coloration. That insane camouflage helps them match various rock types like granite, limestone, sandstones, and their diets are often quite variable as well, from small lizards and mammals to even birds. Venom-wise, these guys aren't super toxic. There's been a few bites, but nothing ever too severe, but they are still definitely a medically significant snake. So if you are bitten by one, make sure to get to a hospital. Now jumping to the northeastern desert plateau, this region of the state is home to the prairie rattlesnake, a fairly toxic and widespread species in the US that's oftentimes known for denning. But in Arizona, they're a bit unique. These are the Hopi rattlesnakes, a small desert subspecies of prairie rattlesnake that's a bit smaller than their Midwestern counterparts, and they aren't nearly as social, so they don't den up as much. Named for the region's native inhabitants, these snakes start around the Colorado Plateau, where they aren't a super common species, well into the reserves, where they aren't being encountered by people all too often. Being a small, almost dwarf version of your typical prairies, they're found across this sort of intergrade habitat, and because of this, they're also capable of hybridizing with another rattlesnake species, one that we'll be taking a look at more later. Prairie rattlesnakes are pretty basic, but in the state of Arizona, they certainly have some regional uniqueness to them. Now, if you go up the Colorado Plateau and into the Sky Islands, you'll find a snake that's very closely related to the prairies, but is specifically adapted for mountain environments, the Arizona black rattlesnake. This is actually my favorite rattlesnake species in the state. They are just the sickest looking snakes out there. I think black snakes are some of the coolest looking ones, and rattlesnakes are already cool. So black rattlesnakes?
Yes! Boom!
Super cool. Essentially a large mountain prairie rattlesnake, Arizona blacks are adapted for cooler montane habitats, with their color helping them to thermoregulate a bit easier. And that patterning helps them to camouflage into shadowy corners of the more montane pine and oak woodlands. Their range cuts straight across the center of the state. And surprisingly for a montane species, they do have some negative encounters with people, usually within the National Forest recreational areas, or like places people don't live, like Flagstaff. Overall, they're not as toxic as their lowland counterparts, but they still do get a bit of size to them, so they do have a pretty decent venom yield. Now, the coolest thing about the Arizona black rattlesnake is their ability to change colors. They actually undergo a morphological color change where melanin movement can cause them to be lighter or darker depending on what they need. Now, they will often undergo this color change under stress, but it's also used for camouflage and thermoregulation. It's not as extreme or as fast as other reptiles like chameleons, but it still is a color-changing snake, so yeah, that's pretty sick. Hey, you should subscribe. I mean, where else are you gonna find all of these crazy snakes filmed in the same place? We work really hard to document as many of these animals for ourselves to bring you some quality snake content. So if that's something you want to see more of, make sure to subscribe. We're currently going through and mapping all of the state's venomous snakes, and we have some other really cool projects in the works that I think that y'all will enjoy. Now back to the lowland deserts, we have the classic rattlesnake. This is the rattlesnake of the American Southwest, the Western Diamondback rattlesnake. The most common rattlesnake species in the state by far, and certainly one that runs into a lot of conflicts with people. I do believe that this is my most encountered Western rattlesnake species, not within the state of Arizona, just within Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arizona, California, all the states that they can live in virtually. But having seen them from other places, these snakes are very distinct in Arizona. They have a very light tan coloration here, with that typical diamondback patterning, with a sort of raccoon-looking tail with those black and white bands. They can be found all throughout central and south Arizona, and as far north as Flagstaff, and they go all the way up to the western corner of the Grand Canyon region as well. These are some of the largest rattlesnake species in the region. And while they don't get as big as their Midwestern or Texas counterparts, Arizona diamondbacks are capable of reaching up to 5 feet in length. Any larger diamondbacks are typically going to be coming out of Texas, or somewhere in the Midwest. Everyone loves to talk about 7 and 8 foot diamondbacks in the state, and it just, as much as I would love for it to be a real thing, it just does not happen. They are a very adaptable snake, and they can often be found living in very populated areas, looking for water and shelter, which, as you can imagine, leads to a lot of human-snake conflict. Their venom is decently potent, but on top of their venom potency, these guys have a very high venom yield, and that makes them a potentially lethal bite. Like I said, they're the largest and most common rattlesnake in the region, and that combination often puts them in the top 3 most medically significant rattlesnakes in the country. But they really don't want a lot to do with people. They mostly eat small mammals like rodents and rabbits, although occasionally they have been known to eat a small lizard or even a bird. The coolest thing about Western diamondbacks is just how often we see rattlesnake behaviors because we see these guys so often, from male combat and denning behavior to color morphs and regional variants. A rattlesnake this common is how we know so much about rattlesnakes as a whole. Now, Western diamondbacks are pretty extreme snakes, but there's another rattlesnake that looks very similar here in South Arizona. It's more extreme, and it's one I've alluded to a few times now, and that's the Mojave Rattlesnake. This is the most venomous rattlesnake within the state and likely in the world. While the tiger rattlesnake is drop for drop the most toxic, Mojaves actually have a lot more venom, and it is many times more potent than that of a diamondback. This means Mojaves have enough venom to kill multiple people. But I'm sure you've all heard this before. Let's talk about some stuff you might not know about the Mojave. Inhabiting a somewhat similar range to the Western diamondback in the state, confined to just a little bit more south, Mojave rattlesnakes usually have a lot more white on their tail, and they can oftentimes have a bit of a greenish tinge, sometimes earning them the name of Mojave greens. And they oftentimes rely a lot more on mammal burrows and decent soil structure within open desert environments than Western diamondbacks would. This means that unlike Western diamondbacks, these guys are not adaptable to the urban sprawl, and oftentimes will go locally extinct when developments occur. These snakes oftentimes get a really bad rap because of their venom, oftentimes being counted as more aggressive than other species, but that's just not the case. While it's true that the bite of the Mojave is more serious than your typical rattlesnake, Mojaves aren't this crazy aggressive species waiting around every desert corner to bite you. They're pretty similar to diamondbacks, although there is one exception to that. You see, Mojave rattlesnakes and prairie rattlesnakes are similar enough that they can actually hybridize. Mostly found within the southeastern corner of the state, these hybrids can sometimes show some interesting behavior that you could call a bit more snappy. I'm not sure if anyone has ever done venom work on these hybrids before, but I would imagine on top of this different temperament, they also probably have a different venom type. In fact, many of you will know this, but pure Mojaves actually do have different venom types depending on their region, some of which have a lot more neurotoxin, or venom that attacks the nervous system. If you know anything about rattlesnakes or just pit vipers in general, you'll know that most of them have hemotoxins, cytotoxins, and myotoxins. But these guys, as well as a few other species, actually do have those neurotoxic components that makes their bites far more deadly. And speaking of neurotoxic snakes, we finally have a non-rattlesnake on our list, the Sonoran coral snake. These guys are elapids, the same family as cobras, mambas, and sea snakes, and they actually have a very potent neurotoxic venom. Now, the reason they have that neurotoxic venom is because these guys are reptile specialists, mostly feeding on other snakes. If you're hunting small mammals or even birds, hemotoxins are really effective at ending circulation, whereas if you're biting other reptiles, neurotoxins are preferred in order to paralyze them. Now, the Sonoran coral snakes aren't exactly like their eastern counterparts. They have much smaller heads, these more desaturated colors, and they actually have a lot less potent venom. In fact, these are actually a monotypic coral snake species, meaning they're the only species within their genus. And aside from mishandling and playing with these snakes, bites are rare and deaths are unheard of. So these snakes are mostly just out here biting other small snakes like centipede snakes or night snakes. Now, the coral snake rhyme, do not even think of using it out here. Seriously, it does not work. Shovel-nosed snakes, long-nosed snakes, sand snakes, all of these little desert colubrid banded snakes have a very similar coloration to the Sonoran coral, and it doesn't mean that they're venomous. Also, a lot of times they don't even have a true yellow coloration. If you see a brightly colored snake in the Sonoran desert and you can't identify it, just leave it alone. These guys are super chill, pleasant little snakes, and there's absolutely no reason to harm them or think that they're going to harm you. I've been lucky enough to encounter these guys a couple of times, and it has been an absolute treat every single time. And I can honestly say these are some of my favorite memories within the state of Arizona.
Yay! No way! I thought it was a long nose. Oh, you thought it was a long nose, brother. Yo! I was just gonna go, man. The corals are cool to see. We're just talking about the lappets.
And the chance to actually see one is very small. In fact, it's usually going to be about the weather or the timing that they're coming out in the open. And speaking of really chill venomous snakes, we have the Western black-tailed rattlesnake. Another favorite of mine. These guys can be found all throughout the state, everywhere except for that northeastern desert plateau. Western blacktails have this sort of greenish coloration with these dark patterns down the back that taper into that black tail leading to the rattle. Hence the name blacktail. Now, they live across a variety of different habitats, from lowland deserts all the way up to the Sky Islands. But I've found that they really love those canyon, more rocky habitats with a lot of small bushes and trees, with some of those woodland habitat components. And the reason for that is they're actually pretty decent climbers. Unlike many of their lowland relatives, these guys actually enjoy spending some of their time off the ground, and occasionally will raid birds' nests or mammal nests that are a little bit harder to get to. To me, these guys are like a tropical rattlesnake that just barely comes into the US. In fact, they're very similar to some of the Central American rattlesnake species. And some of the other blacktail species share these traits as well. And if we didn't already have enough rattlesnakes with Western in their name, let's take a look at the Western rattlesnake complex. Not the Western Diamondback, not the Western blacktail, Western rattlesnake. I've talked about these guys before in the rattlesnake iceberg, but in Arizona, there are actually 3 Western rattlesnake subspecies, or localities, whatever you want to call them. The Great Basin rattlesnake, the Grand Canyon rattlesnake, and the Midget faded rattlesnake. Technically, these are all the same species of rattlesnake, but they are quite distinct, so I'll talk about them real quick. Great Basin rattlesnakes are probably one of the hardest to identify for most people, living in the more northern parts of the state. Grand Canyons have that drab sandstone coloration, and as their name suggests, they live more so around the Grand Canyon region. I actually think they just totally deleted these guys and just call them Great Basins now. I don't know what's happening with taxonomy anymore. And the Midget faded rattlesnake is actually the most toxic of the Western complex, with some tested to be lower than Mojaves and sometimes as toxic as tiger rattlesnakes. Now, of course, this isn't super consistent, and it's only a few localities that have been tested to be this toxic, but Midget faded's pretty toxic rattlesnake overall. Luckily, these guys live in much more remote regions than our previous Western rattlesnakes, so bites within the state of Arizona are incredibly rare. And I'm not going to go down the Western rattlesnake rabbit hole here, but just know that they're super variable, hard to distinguish, and for the purposes of this video, I'm counting them as one. And it's a good thing to mention, one of the reasons people say that there are over 20 venomous snakes in the state is not only counting snake subspecies, but also counting some of the mildly venomous ones. Things like night snakes, vine snakes, hognose snakes, or even regal ringneck snakes have that mild venom. But none of those snakes are actually medically significant, meaning they don't pose any threat to people. So this list is the most accurate interpretation of how many medically significant species live in Arizona. Okay, now it's time for some of the smaller, more unique species. The Sidewinder is the icon of the desert, found throughout central and south Arizona, and all the way along the western border of the state into the western Grand Canyon region. Sidewinders grow no longer than 2.5 feet in length, and like Mojaves, they like those more open, sandy environments. Their ecology is pretty unique, and their weird form of locomotion is meant to get them over those really hot sands really quickly. So they will actually be a little bit more active during the day than other rattlesnakes. They also have those little horn-like scales above the eyes, which I believe helps to keep sand out of their eye. These guys are certainly a desert specialist. I first encountered them back in 2018 with my buddy Burke, and since then that population has actually been decimated, which is really a shame. These snakes are quickly vanishing from certain desert regions, and they are much more sensitive rattlesnakes than others. Now you might think, hey, that's a good thing, venomous snake, get them out of here. But sidewinders are actually a very mildly venomous species, and there's actually never been a death from one of these snakes. They're also an incredibly iconic and important part of the natural history of Arizona. So it's a real shame that in some areas they're in decline. There are actually 3 subspecies of Sidewinder, and of the 3, the Colorado Sidewinder is probably my favorite. They all look very similar. They just inhabit slightly different desert. But yeah, that definitely would add to that over 20 venomous snakes count if you're counting 3 different Sidewinders. Despite being a much smaller species, these are in fact a Crotalus rattlesnake, a full-sized rattlesnake species. But our next snake is not. Our only Sistrurus or pygmy rattlesnake on our list, the western Massasauga inhabits the extreme southeast corner of the state, in places that if I told you where it was, I would have to kill you. Unlike the pygmy rattlesnakes of the southeast, these guys actually have a venom as potent as many other full-size rattlesnake species. But being as they're so small, their bites aren't particularly life-threatening. Still though, if you get bit by one, you're probably a long way out from medical help, so you're in trouble. Historically, the Massasaugas in Arizona would be called desert Massasaugas. Similar to the prairie rattlesnake subspecies, it's basically a desert variant, which is smaller and more adapt to the extreme environment. If you see one of these guys in the state of Arizona, congratulations. These are certainly an isolated species within the state, and in many parts of their range, they actually are considered to be threatened or even endangered, much like their eastern counterpart. While they aren't particularly flashy, these are a very unique species within the state. Like I said, they're the only true pygmy rattlesnake. Okay, it's time to get out of the lowlands, back into the montane habitats, because we're looking at the Sky Island specialists. And first up, we have the banded rock rattlesnake. Found widely throughout the southeastern Sky Island, these are the most common of the montane rattlers. Like all the montanes, these guys are pretty small, usually found between 1 foot to 2 feet in length, and they're designed to blend into that rocky montane habitat, where they mostly hunt for lizards and on occasion, small rodents. My buddies Harrison and Evan actually got this incredible footage of a rock rattlesnake eating a lizard. And it's some of my favorite footage of the species available online. And it's a good showcase of how these are not your typical mammal specialists. In my opinion, these are also some of the cleanest looking rock rattlesnakes. The first rock rattlesnakes I ever saw were in West Texas, and those are the mottled variety. And while they are super special, I think these ones are just iconic to the Arizona Sky Islands. Their venom isn't super toxic, but it is certainly a painful bite. I know a few people that have been bitten by them, so please, no matter how small they still are a rattlesnake species. Our next snake is actually the state reptile of Arizona. An absolute icon of the Sky Islands, it's the ridge-nosed rattlesnake, particularly the Arizona ridge-nosed. Essentially a woodland version of the rock rattlesnake, found in many of the same habitats, the ridge-nosed rattlesnakes are very distinct looking with that upturned nose and that drab woody coloration. Like I said, they're a wood variant of the rock rattlesnake. Found only in a handful of Sky Islands along the Arizona-Mexico border, a majority of ridge-nosed habitats and subspecies are actually in Mexico. So really, we only get a small fraction of their overall habitat here in the US. Now, their subspecies are actually very distinct. I'm surprised they're not considered full species sometimes. In fact, the New Mexico ridge-nosed rattlesnake, found in the extreme southeast corner of the state, almost looks like an entirely different snake, and it is insanely rare. In fact, ridge-nosed rattlesnakes have been protected for some time now, with some populations under extreme risk of collapse due to poaching and wildfire. I think it's incredible that there's actually people doing work to help conserve their habitats and these populations in very isolated locations. Also, speaking of conservation work, we actually have a tortoise fundraiser going on under this video that we launched recently. So if you want to help with some conservation work, just go ahead and give that a peek. And now for our rarest and most mysterious rattlesnake species, a venomous snake that we actually have never recorded a bite of. It's the twin-spotted rattlesnake, an extreme montane species. These guys live way up there in the Sky Island ecosystem, usually above 6,000 feet in elevation, in some very precarious location. Now, we've actually never featured a twin-spotted here on the channel, but I have been to their lairs, so to speak, and I can honestly say that the habitat that they live in is more dangerous than they are. Like, some of that stuff is just sheer straight downfall. Maxing out at around 2 feet in length, twin-spotted rattlesnakes are another one of those crazy montane species that just has an extreme lifestyle. And you are not going to be encountering, or hopefully ever being bitten by one of these snakes. And if you do get bit, you would be one of the first ones on record. Something in me just has this deep curiosity of, what if the venom is super toxic, but like, they eat lizards, they live in the mountains. It's not. This may not be a venomous snake you're likely to encounter, but what should you ever do if you ever encounter any of these venomous snakes in the state of Arizona? We have covered 14 different venomous species and over 20 subspecies or localities, which, as I mentioned, is more than any other state in the country. If you're out in nature and you see one of these snakes, just leave it alone. Bites usually happen when you try to kill or remove the snake, so that's never a good idea. Rattlesnakes oftentimes stay put when they're left undisturbed. And when it comes to our coral snake, they're honestly just not a threat to people. Like, straight up, if you see a coral snake, my recommendation, even on my own property, would be to just leave these guys. But sometimes snakes can get into pretty precarious places, and they can't always stay there. So I always recommend calling a relocation service. And in Arizona, Rattlesnake Solutions is a company that works day and night, and they have safely relocated thousands of venomous snakes. They are excellent people, and we've even met up and filmed with them before. They're very professional. They also do snake proofing and other snake-related services. This video isn't sponsored by them or anything, nor do I make any money from the recommendation. They're just excellent people working throughout Arizona to help keep people and snakes safe. If you want to know more about rattlesnakes, make sure to check out this video where we cover every single species on Earth, literally every single species. And if you want to know more about our disappearing rattlesnakes, check out this video as to why the Eastern Diamondback is losing ground fast. Thank y'all for watching this video, and I will see you guys next time.